The marble floors of the mansion gleamed under the crystal chandelier as I watched my stepmother scrub them on her hands and knees. Just 2 years ago, I was in her exact position. Now she works for me. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Miss Cynthia, she said without looking up, her voice strained, the floors in the East Wing are finished. I nodded, adjusting my designer blazer. Good. The kitchen needs attention next. And Margaret? She finally looked up, her once proud face now lined with exhaustion. Don't forget to clean behind the refrigerator this time. Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. How far we had both fallen and risen. The story begins 5 years earlier, when I was 22 and invisible in my own family's home. Well, technically, it wasn't my family's home. It was my late father's mansion in Beverly Hills, but I had no claim to it, not according to my stepmother Margaret anyway. Cynthia, where's my morning tea? Margaret's shrill voice echoed through the hallways of the estate. I glanced at the clock, 6:47 a.m. She was early today. I hurried to the kitchen, my worn slippers sliding on the polished marble. The house was a monument to excess. 12 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, a pool that could host the Olympics, and a kitchen that belonged in a 5-star restaurant. Too bad I was the only one who seemed to know how to use any of it. It's coming, Margaret, I called back, filling the electric kettle. The morning routine never changed. Tea for Margaret, black coffee for my stepbrother Derek, and green juice for my stepsister Vivian, all served on silver trays with cloth napkins and fresh flowers. Never mind that I hadn't eaten breakfast myself in 3 days because someone had to go to the grocery shop and I hadn't been given money for food. My father had died when I was 19, leaving behind what should have been a fortune. Instead, Margaret had somehow maneuvered herself into controlling everything. Your father wanted to make sure you were taken care of, she had told me with mock concern. That's why he left me in charge of your inheritance until you're ready to handle it responsibly. 3 years later, I was still waiting to see a single dollar of that inheritance. Cynthia! This time it was Derek's voice, booming from upstairs. My suit needs pressing for the country club. I abandoned the tea preparations and rushed to Derek's room, my former room, actually. When Margaret decided the family needed to restructure after my father's death, she'd moved me to the servants' quarters behind the kitchen. Derek's room was twice the size of my current space and overlooked the gardens my father had loved. Derek stood in front of his walk-in closet, which was larger than most people's bedrooms. At 25, he had never worked a day in his life, funded entirely by what used to be my father's money. His idea of contribution was playing tennis at the country club and networking, which mostly involved drinking with other trust fund kids. Which suit? I asked, though I could see perfectly well which one he meant. It was the only one hanging outside the closet. The navy Armani, and make sure you get the wrinkles out of the jacket properly this time. I have an important lunch today. Every lunch was important, according to Derek. Usually it meant he was trying to impress some girl with daddy's money, except now it was my father's money being spent. I took the suit and headed to the laundry room, passing Vivian's bedroom. At 23, she was closer to my age, but treated me like I was invisible unless she needed something. Through her cracked door, I could see designer dresses scattered across the floor, outfits that cost more than most people made in a month. Oh, Cindy, Vivian appeared in her doorway, using the nickname I hated. I need you to drive me to Rodeo Drive today. I'm meeting the girls for shopping. I have to clean the guest bathrooms today, and your mother wants... It's not a request, Vivian interrupted, examining her manicured nails. Besides, you need to drive anyway. The car needs gas, and you know I don't do gas stations. I bit back my response. The car was a brand new Mercedes SUV that had replaced my father's sedan after his death. I wasn't allowed to drive it, except when running errands for the family, and I certainly wasn't allowed to use it for my own purposes. In the laundry room, I set up the ironing board and heated the iron. This had become my life. Cooking, cleaning, driving, organizing, all while living in a house that should have been mine. The servants' quarters were comfortable enough, with a small bedroom, bathroom, and sitting area, but they felt like a prison when I knew my father's study sat empty just down the hall. My father had been a successful real estate developer, building shopping centers and office complexes throughout Southern California. He taught me about his business from the time I could walk, taking me to construction sites and explaining how deals were structured. This will all be yours someday, sweetheart, but you need to understand it from the ground up. I never imagined ground up would mean starting as unpaid domestic help in my own home. The ironing finished, I delivered Derek's suit and returned to the kitchen to find Margaret waiting with an expression that could freeze water. "Your tea is cold," she said, holding up the cup. "I'm sorry, Derek needed—" "I don't want excuses, Cynthia. I want competence." Margaret was 45, but looked older, her face set in permanent lines of disapproval. She'd married my father when I was 16, and I'd never been able to figure out what he'd seen in her. Maybe after my mother's death when I was 12, he'd just been lonely. "Start over, and this time, pay attention to what you're doing." I dumped the cold tea and started fresh, my hands shaking slightly with suppressed anger. This was my daily reality, treated like hired help in my father's house, dependent on people who seemed to despise my existence. The worst part wasn't the work, or even the disrespect. It was the isolation. I had friends in college, but that ended when the tuition money mysteriously became unavailable after my father's death. "We need to be practical about expenses now," Margaret had explained. "College is a luxury we can't afford." Meanwhile, Derek had just bought his third luxury watch, and Vivian had redecorated her room twice in 6 months. I finished Margaret's tea and served it with a smile I didn't feel. She took a sip, nodded curtly, and walked away without a word of thanks. Standing alone in the kitchen, I looked out the window at the perfectly manicured grounds. Somewhere beyond those gates was a world where I could make my own decisions, control my own life, and be treated with basic human dignity. But for now, I was trapped by circumstances I couldn't change, and a family that saw me as nothing more than convenient labor. What they didn't know was that every night, in my small room behind the kitchen, I was planning. My father had taught me well, and I remembered every lesson about business, strategy, and patience. The inheritance they thought they controlled, I'd been researching the legal details for months. My stepfamily might have won the first round, but this game was far from over. I just had to bide my time a little longer. The law office of Harrison and Associates sat on the 32nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Los Angeles. I smoothed my only professional outfit, a navy dress I'd bought 3 years ago for my father's funeral, and checked my reflection in the elevator's polished doors. Dark circles under my eyes told the story of sleepless nights spent researching legal documents, but my expression was determined. "Miss Cynthia Blackwood?" The receptionist looked surprised when I approached her desk. Most people my age probably didn't schedule appointments with senior partners at prestigious law firms. "Yes, I have a 2 p.m. appointment with Mr. Harrison." She checked her computer, frowning slightly. "Right this way." James Harrison was exactly what I'd expected. Silver-haired, expensive suit, and an office that screamed success. What I hadn't expected was the younger man sitting across from his desk, reviewing documents with intense focus. "Miss Blackwood," Harrison stood as I entered. "Please have a seat. This is my associate, Alexander Morrison. He's been reviewing your father's estate documents." Alexander looked up, and I felt my breath catch. He couldn't have been much older than me, with dark hair and sharp green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. But it was the intelligence in his gaze that struck me most. Here was someone who understood the complexities I'd been drowning in. "Miss Blackwood," Alexander stood and extended his hand. "I have to say, your call was quite intriguing. Most beneficiaries don't request independent reviews of estate settlements 3 years after probate." His handshake was firm, professional, but I noticed he held eye contact a moment longer than necessary. "Most beneficiaries aren't living as unpaid servants in their own inheritance," I replied. Harrison gestured for us to sit. "Yes, well, that's certainly an unusual situation. Alexander has been going through the documentation you provided, and I must say, some of the arrangements your stepmother has made are creative." Creative? I pulled out my own folder of documents I'd secretly copied from my father's study. You mean illegal? Alexander leaned forward, his expression serious. Not illegal, exactly, but definitely questionable. Your stepmother was named as executor and trustee, which gives her broad powers over the estate until you reach 25 or meet certain conditions. What conditions? This was news to me. Completion of a 4-year college degree or demonstration of financial responsibility through steady employment for 2 years, Alexander read from the document. The interesting thing is, there's no record of you being informed of these conditions. My hands clenched in my lap. Margaret told me I had to wait until I was ready to handle responsibility. She never mentioned specific requirements. Because if you'd known, Harrison said gravely, you could have met them years ago. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. I'd been deliberately kept ignorant of the very criteria that would free me from my stepfamily's control. There's more, Alexander continued, his voice gentle but determined. The trustee is required to provide annual accounting of all estate expenditures and ensure the beneficiary's basic needs are met during the waiting period. Education expenses, healthcare, reasonable living allowances, all of these should have been provided.
Instead, they've been using estate funds for luxury purchases while providing you with essentially nothing. Harrison added, this could constitute a breach of fiduciary duty.
I felt a mixture of vindication and rage. So what can I do? Alexander and Harrison exchanged glances. We can file for an accounting of all estate expenditures and petition for your immediate access to the inheritance, Alexander said. But I have to warn you, this will be a fight. Your stepfamily won't give up control easily.
How long would it take?
Several months, possibly longer if they contested aggressively, Harrison replied. And you'd need somewhere to live during the legal proceedings. I assume staying in your current situation wouldn't be comfortable. He was right. The moment Margaret learned about legal action, my life at the house would become unbearable. But I'd been planning for this. I have some money saved, I lied smoothly. In reality, I had about $300 and a secret weapon I wasn't ready to reveal yet. There's one more thing, Alexander said, pulling out another document. Your father made some specific provisions about the family business. Blackwood Development was supposed to transfer to you upon meeting the same conditions as the personal inheritance. My heart stopped. Does the business still exist?
Very much so. Your stepmother has been running it, or rather, hiring management companies to run it while she collects the profits. It's actually been quite successful.
The family business my father had spent 20 years building, the one he'd taught me about since childhood, was still operating, and it was legally mine. I want to see the company, I said suddenly. Alexander looked surprised. Miss Blackwood, I should mention that your stepfamily doesn't know I've been reviewing these documents. If you approach the business directly, they'll know something's up, I finished. Good, let them wonder. Harrison leaned back in his chair. Miss Blackwood, I feel obligated to ask, are you prepared for the consequences of this action? Legal battles can be expensive and emotionally draining. Mr. Harrison, I've been emotionally drained for 3 years while watching my inheritance fund my stepfamily's lifestyle. I'm ready for a different kind of fight. Alexander smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him. In that case, we should discuss strategy. The strongest approach would be to document the current mismanagement while simultaneously proving your competence to handle the inheritance.
What do you mean?
If you can demonstrate business acumen, perhaps through involvement with Blackwood Development, it would strengthen our case significantly, he explained. Show that you're not just demanding access to money, but that you understand the responsibility that comes with it. An idea began forming in my mind. What if I applied for a position at the company, under a different name, maybe? Harrison looked troubled. That could be considered deceptive. Or it could be considered a practical assessment of my own inheritance, Alexander countered, earning a sharp look from his senior partner. If Miss Blackwood can prove she's capable of contributing to the business without relying on family connections, it demonstrates exactly the kind of responsibility the trust requires.
You'd be willing to help with something like that?
I asked Alexander.
I'd be willing to help you reclaim what's rightfully yours, he replied. Your father built that company to provide for your future. You shouldn't have to beg for what's already yours.
There was something in his tone, a personal conviction that went beyond professional obligation. I wondered what motivated this obviously talented lawyer to take such an interest in my case. All right, I said, decision made. Let's do this. But I have one condition.
What's that?
I want to handle the business side myself. I need to know I can succeed on my own merit, not just because it's technically mine. Alexander nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of thinking that will win this case. As we discussed the details of moving forward, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not just for getting my inheritance back, but for proving to myself that I was capable of more than just surviving my stepfamily's cruelty. When I left the law office that afternoon, I had a plan, a legal team, and something else unexpected: the memory of Alexander's encouraging smile and the way he'd said "we" when discussing strategy. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't facing this fight alone. Now I just had to figure out how to apply for a job at my own company without my stepfamily discovering the truth. But first, I had to survive dinner service and pretend nothing had changed. The Blackwood development offices occupied 3 floors of a sleek building in Century City. Standing in the lobby, I barely recognized the company my father had built from his garage 25 years ago. Gone were the warm wood panels and family photos I remembered from childhood visits. Everything was now cold glass and chrome, impressive but soulless. Miss Chen? The receptionist looked up from her desk. Mr. Rodriguez will see you now. I'd spent 2 weeks crafting my new identity. Catherine Chen, recent MBA graduate from USC, specializing in commercial real estate development. Alexander had helped me create an airtight resume that would pass any background check, all legitimate credentials under a carefully constructed identity. Miguel Rodriguez, the current general manager, was a thin man in his 50s with nervous energy and an expensive watch. He led me to a conference room overlooking the city. So, Miss Chen, tell me why you're interested in joining our acquisitions team. I'd rehearsed this moment, but sitting in my father's building made the words feel more personal than I'd expected. Blackwood Development has a reputation for quality projects that enhance communities rather than just maximizing profits. That's the kind of development work I want to be part of. Rodriguez nodded, though something in his expression seemed strained. Yes, well, we do try to maintain certain standards, though the market has been challenging lately. How so? He hesitated, glancing toward the door. Nothing we can't handle, of course, just the usual pressures of growth and expansion. During the next hour, Rodriguez walked me through several current projects, but the more he talked, the more concerned I became. The company was involved in developments that seemed completely contrary to my father's principles: strip malls in low-income neighborhoods, office buildings that displaced small businesses, residential projects that prioritized quick profits over community impact. This shopping center in East LA, I said, studying the plans. What happened to the businesses that were there before? Oh, you know how these things go. Progress requires some adjustments. I knew my father would have been horrified. He'd always insisted that development should improve communities, not destroy them. After the interview, I walked through the offices, ostensibly waiting for my parking validation. The cubicles were filled with young professionals who looked stressed and overworked. In the break room, I overheard 2 employees talking quietly. Another round of layoffs next month. Rodriguez is just following orders from the ownership. Used to be such a good place to work before Old Man Blackwood died. My chest tightened. My father's company, his legacy, was being run into the ground while the profits lined my stepfamily's pockets. Excuse me, I approached the 2 employees. I'm Catherine Chen, just interviewed for the acquisitions team. This seems like a great company. The older employee, a woman in her 40s, gave me a sad smile. It used to be. Richard Blackwood, the founder, he really cared about doing good work. His family, well, let's just say they have different priorities. What kind of different priorities? Maximum profit, minimum investment in pupil or quality. Half our senior staff has quit in the past 2 years. Projects that would have taken months of community consultation now get rushed through in weeks. My phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. How did it go? I stepped outside to call him. I got the job, but Alexander, what they've done to my father's company, it's heartbreaking. What do you mean? I described what I'd seen and heard. Alexander listened without interrupting, and I could hear him taking notes. This actually strengthens our case, he said finally. If we can document mismanagement of the business assets, it supports our argument for immediate transfer of control. But what about all the employees who are suffering and the communities being damaged by these projects? There was a pause. Cynthia, you can't save everyone right now. You need to focus on getting control of your inheritance first. He was right, but it didn't make it easier. When do I start? Monday. And Cynthia, be careful. Don't give them any reason to suspect who you really are. That evening, I returned to the mansion to find chaos. Margaret was pacing the living room, while Derek and Vivian sat on the leather couches looking annoyed. "Where have you been?" Margaret demanded. "I've been calling you for hours." "I was running errands, the dry cleaning, grocery shopping." "Well, drop everything. We're having a dinner party tomorrow night. 12 guests, a full-course meal, and the house needs to be perfect." My heart sank. A dinner party meant 18 hours of preparation, cooking, and cleaning. "Margaret, I actually need to." "You need to do what? You don't have anything more important than your responsibilities to this family." Derek looked up from his phone. "Make sure you do those bacon-wrapped scallops Mom likes, and that chocolate soufflé thing." "The chocolate soufflé takes 6 hours to prepare properly," I said. "Then you better start early," Vivian added, without looking up from her magazine. I excused myself and went to my room, mind racing. I'd already accepted the job at Blackwood Development, starting Monday. There was no way I could manage both my new position and my stepfamily's increasing demands. My phone rang. Alexander. "Hey, I was thinking about what you said earlier, about wanting to help the employees and community projects." "Alexander, I can't really talk right now. Just hear me out. What if we approach this differently? Instead of just documenting mismanagement for the legal case, what if you actually tried to fix things from the inside?" "What do you mean?" "Use your position to gather evidence, yes, but also to slowly steer projects in better directions. Build relationships with the staff who remember your father. Create a paper trail showing how much better the company performs when it follows ethical practices." The idea was appealing but risky. That would mean staying undercover longer. It would also mean that when you do take control, you'll have allies in place and a clear plan for improvement. Plus, it gives us more ammunition for the legal case. "Alexander, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why are you so invested in this? I mean, beyond the legal fees." There was a long pause. "My father worked construction, honest work, but companies like Blackwood, the good version of Blackwood, they provided stable jobs and built things that mattered. When developers only care about profit, it's guys like my dad who suffer." His personal stake in this made sense now, and it made me trust him even more. "Okay," I decided. "Let's try your plan. But I'm going to need help managing things here." "What kind of help?" Before I could answer, Margaret's voice echoed through the house. "Cynthia, come explain why there's no food for tomorrow's party." The kind where my stepfamily doesn't realize I'm about to become their worst nightmare. Alexander laughed. "I like your confidence. Call me after your first day at work." "And Cynthia?" "Yeah?" "Remember, you're not the same person who was serving them tea 6 months ago. You're Catherine Chen now, educated, professional, and nobody's maid." After hanging up, I looked at myself in the small mirror above my dresser. He was right. I'd been so focused on survival that I'd forgotten I was capable of more than just enduring. Tomorrow night, I'd serve Margaret's dinner party with a smile. But Monday morning, I'd walk into my father's company as an equal, ready to reclaim everything that had been stolen from me. The hardest part would be remembering that Catherine Chen was confident and capable, while Cynthia Blackwood was still supposed to be grateful for scraps. But I was done being grateful. It was time to start being strategic. 3 weeks into my double life, everything started unraveling at once. It began on a Thursday morning when Derek burst into the kitchen while I was preparing breakfast. Mom wants you to cancel whatever plans you have today. She needs you to drive her to some charity luncheon and then help her pick out jewelry for tonight's gala. I nearly dropped the coffee pot. I can't. I have appointments. Derek's eyebrows shot up. Since when did the family maid have appointments that couldn't be canceled? What kind of appointments? Medical, I lied quickly. Follow-up from last month. I'd fabricated a minor procedure to explain some of my absences, but Derek had never questioned it before. Well, reschedule it. Mom's charity thing is more important than whatever's wrong with you. At that moment, my phone buzzed with a text from my colleague Jason at Blackwood Development. Emergency client meeting moved to 2 p.m. today. Rodriguez wants you to present the Highland Park proposal. My stomach dropped. The Highland Park project was my first chance to prove myself at the company, a community development that could actually help people instead of displacing them. I'd spent weeks researching and preparing, and Rodriguez had finally agreed to let me pitch my alternative approach to the clients. I really can't reschedule, I told Derek, trying to keep my voice steady. His expression darkened. Since when do you tell us what you can and can't do? Before I could respond, Margaret swept into the kitchen wearing a silk robe that cost more than most people's monthly rent. What's all this shouting about? Your maid thinks her doctor's appointment is more important than your charity luncheon, Derek said with a sneer. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Is that so? Cynthia, I think you've forgotten your place in this household. I haven't forgotten anything, I replied, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Excuse me? Margaret's tone could have frozen fire. I realized I'd made a mistake. Catherine Chen's confidence was bleeding through into Cynthia Blackwood's submissive facade. I just meant the doctor said this follow-up was critical. Then you'll have to choose, Margaret said coldly, your medical appointment or your home, because if you're not available when this family needs you, perhaps it's time to reconsider our arrangement. The threat hung in the air like poison. If Margaret kicked me out now, I'd lose access to my father's documents, my base of operations, and any chance of maintaining my cover story at work. Fine, I said quietly. I'll cancel the appointment. Margaret smiled triumphantly. Good. Be ready to leave in an hour. As soon as they left the kitchen, I frantically called Alexander. I need help, I said without preamble. My stepfamily is sabotaging my work schedule, and I can't miss this presentation today. Calm down, tell me what's happening. I explained the situation while simultaneously texting Jason that I might be late to the meeting. Okay, Alexander said after a moment. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to call the house in 10 minutes and tell Margaret there's been a legal emergency requiring your immediate presence. What kind of legal emergency? Something about your father's estate, insurance issues that need immediate attention. She won't be able to argue with that without revealing she's been hiding information from you. Alexander, you're brilliant. Just doing my job. But Cynthia, this is getting dangerous. Your double life is becoming unsustainable. He was right, but I wasn't ready to give up yet. The Highland Park project could change everything, not just for my legal case, but for the community and the company. An hour later, I was sitting in the Blackwood Development conference room across 3 potential investors and a community representative. Rodriguez looked nervous, constantly checking his phone and wiping sweat from his forehead. Gentlemen, Miss Patterson, I began, addressing the investors and the community advocate. The Highland Park project represents an opportunity to revitalize a neighborhood while preserving its character and supporting existing residents. I clicked through my presentation, showing how mixed-income housing could coexist with local businesses, how green spaces could be integrated without displacing families, and how the project could generate solid returns while actually improving the community.
The investors listened intently, but it was Janet Patterson, the community representative, whose reaction mattered most. "This is not what I expected," she said slowly. "Most developers come in with plans to tear everything down and start over." This isn't most developers. Blackwood Development was founded on the principle that good business and community benefits aren't mutually exclusive. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. He knew as well as I did that the current Blackwood development had abandoned those principles entirely. "The numbers look solid," said David Hartwell, the lead investor, "but this approach will take longer and require more community engagement than a standard development." "True," I acknowledged, "but it also virtually eliminates community opposition, reduces legal challenges, and creates long-term value instead of quick profit." Janet Patterson leaned forward. "Miss Chen, can I ask why this matters to you? Most consultants just care about closing deals." It was a dangerous question. The real answer involved my father's legacy and my own guilt over what the company had become. But Catherine Chen needed a different motivation. "Because I've seen what happens when development ignores community impact," I said carefully. "Property values might rise in the short term, but you end up with unsustainable projects that hurt everyone in the long run."
The meeting ended with cautious optimism from the investors and genuine enthusiasm from Janet Patterson. Rodriguez seemed stunned that anyone had listened to the community perspective seriously. "Miss Chen," Hartwell said as we were leaving, "I'd like to discuss this further. Are you available for dinner tonight?" My heart sank. Tonight was Margaret's charity gala, the one I'd supposedly canceled my doctor's appointment to attend. "I'm sorry, I have a family obligation tonight," I said. "Tomorrow, then?" "Yes, that would be perfect." As the investors left, Rodriguez pulled me aside. "That was impressive work, Catherine. I have to admit, I was skeptical about your community-focused approach, but those investors were genuinely interested." "Thank you, sir." "There's just one thing." His expression grew serious. "I got a strange call earlier from someone claiming to be investigating irregularities in the Blackwood estate. They were asking about employee records and company finances." My blood turned to ice. "Oh?" "Probably just routine audit stuff, but it reminded me, we should run a thorough background check on all new employees. Standard procedure, you understand." I nodded, hoping my expression remained neutral. Of course, company security is important. But as I walked to my car, panic crept in. If they ran a deep background check on Catherine Chen, they'd eventually discover the identity was constructed. And if they were already investigating estate irregularities, it meant Margaret was getting suspicious about something. My phone rang as I reached a parking garage. "Alexander, how did the presentation go?" "Great, but we have a problem. Rodriguez mentioned someone investigating the estate, and they're planning background checks on employees." Damn, Margaret must have gotten spooked when I called with the legal emergency excuse. "What do we do?" "We accelerate our timeline. I've been putting together the estate mismanagement documentation faster than planned. We might need to file the legal challenge sooner than expected. But I haven't gathered enough evidence from inside the company yet. Cynthia, if they discover Catherine Chen is fake, you'll lose access to everything and potentially face fraud charges. Your stepfamily won't hesitate to destroy you if they feel threatened." I sat in my car, weighing the options. Give up the company infiltration and rely on what evidence we had, or risk everything for a chance to save my father's legacy and help the Highland Park community. Give me one more week, I decided. If I can get the Highland Park project approved and document how much better the company performs with ethical practices, it'll be worth the risk. "Cynthia, 1 week, Alexander. Then we go to court with everything we have." There was a long pause. "Okay, but promise me something." "What?" "If this starts falling apart, you run. Don't try to save the situation if it means sacrificing yourself." "I promise." But as I drove home to prepare for Margaret's gala, I knew I was lying. I'd already sacrificed 3 years of my life to my stepfamily's greed. I wasn't about to give up when I was so close to reclaiming everything they'd stolen. The question was whether I could maintain my double life for 1 more week without everything exploding in my face. Given how today had gone, the odds weren't looking good. The Highland Park project approval meeting was scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. By Thursday night, I hadn't slept in 36 hours, and my hands were shaking from too much coffee and pure adrenaline. Margaret Scala had been a nightmare of forced smiles and careful avoidance of family friends who might remember me from before my father's death. I'd served champagne to people who'd once treated me like family, all while maintaining the Invisible Servant Act. But I overheard something that changed everything. The Blackwood estate investigation is moving faster than expected, Margaret had whispered to her sister-in-law in the powder room. That lawyer's been digging through Richard's old business records. If they find the offshore accounts. Offshore accounts? My father had never mentioned offshore accounts, which meant Margaret had been hiding money even though I didn't know about it. Now, standing outside the Blackwood Development Conference Room at 9:55 a.m., I was about to present the most important pitch of my life to investors who could save my father's company, while my stepfamily was potentially hours away from discovering my double identity. Catherine, Rodriguez approached, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him. Ready for this? Absolutely. I wasn't, but Catherine Chen would never admit weakness. Inside the conference room, David Hartwell and his investment partners sat across from Janet Patterson and two other community representatives. At the head of the table, someone I hadn't expected, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes. Catherine, I'd like you to meet Elena Vasquez, Rodriguez said. She's representing the Blackwood family's interests in this decision. My blood went cold. Elena Vasquez was Margaret's personal attorney, the one who'd helped orchestrate my father's estate arrangements. If anyone could recognize me despite my professional appearance and confident demeanor, it would be her. Miss Chen, Elena's eyes studied me carefully. Rodriguez speaks very highly of your community development approach. I'm curious about your background. Miss Chen has an MBA from USC and extensive experience in sustainable development, Rodriguez answered before I could speak. I was asking Miss Chen, Elena said pointedly. I met her gaze directly, channeling every ounce of Catherine Chen's confidence. I believe development should strengthen communities, not exploit them. That philosophy has guided my entire career. Elena's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition? Suspicion? I couldn't tell. Well then, she said finally, let's see this proposal. I launched into my presentation, explaining how the Highland Park project could revitalize the neighborhood while preserving its character. Mixed-income housing that would bring investment without displacement, green spaces that would increase property values for everyone, local business incubators that would create jobs for existing residents. The projected returns are lower in the first 2 years, I acknowledged, but the long-term stability and community support virtually guarantee sustained profits. David Hartwell nodded approvingly. The numbers are solid, and the risk mitigation through community buy-in is impressive. Janet Patterson leaned forward. Miss Chen, this sounds too good to be true. What's the catch? No catch, I replied, just a different philosophy. Instead of maximizing short-term extraction, we're building long-term value. Extraction, Elena repeated slowly. That's an interesting word choice. Warning bells went off in my head, but I pressed on. Poor development practices essentially extract value from communities without giving back. This approach invests in lasting improvement. The presentation continued for another hour. The investors asked detailed questions about financing, timelines, and community integration. Janet Patterson grilled me on gentrification concerns and displacement prevention. Through it all, Elena Vasquez watched me with increasing intensity. I think we've heard enough, David Hartwell finally said. Miss Chen, this is exactly the kind of responsible development we want to support. You have our preliminary approval. Relief flooded through me. The Highland Park project was saved, the community would benefit, and I'd proven that ethical development could be profitable. But my celebration was short-lived. Before we finalize anything, Elena said, standing slowly, I have some concerns about Miss Chen's credentials. Rodriguez frowned. What kind of concerns?
The kind that require immediate investigation. Elena's eyes locked onto mine. Miss Chen, would you mind staying after the meeting? I have some questions about your background verification. My heart hammered against my ribs. Of course. The investors and community representatives filed out, chatting excitedly about project timelines. Rodriguez lingered, looking confused. Elena, what's this about? Catherine's work has been exemplary. Miguel, please give us some privacy. After Rodriguez reluctantly left, Elena walked to the conference room door and closed it. Then she turned to face me with a smile that was anything but friendly. Hello, Cynthia. The words hit me like a physical blow. All pretense crumbled as I stared at the woman who'd helped steal my inheritance. I don't know what you're talking about, I tried weakly. Please, I've known you since you were 16. Did you really think a different hairstyle and some professional clothes would fool me? Elena circled the table slowly, like a predator stalking prey. The question is, what exactly are you trying to accomplish here? My mind raced through options: deny everything, attempt to bluff, or tell the truth and hope she hadn't already called Margaret. I'm trying to save my father's company from being destroyed, I said finally. Elena laughed coldly. Your father's company? Sweetheart, you signed away all claims to that company 3 years ago. I never signed anything. Margaret has your signature on all the necessary documents: renunciation of inheritance claims, transfer of business interests, acknowledgement of estate settlement, all perfectly legal. The room spun around me. That's impossible. I would remember signing. The funeral reception, Elena said matter-of-factly. You were so grief-stricken, signing condolence books and memorial documents. So easy to slip a few legal papers into the stack. The memory came flooding back. The endless line of mourners, the blur of paperwork, my stepfamily helping me handle all the details while I was barely functional with grief. You forged my signature. I witnessed your signature on legally binding documents. There's a difference. Elena pulled out her phone. Now, the question is what to do about your little masquerade here. Elena, wait. Margaret is going to be so disappointed. She actually thought you'd finally accepted your place in the family. My place? Years of suppressed rage exploded out of me. My place should have been inheriting my father's estate, not serving breakfast to the people who stole it. Your father left you in Margaret's care because he knew you weren't ready for responsibility. This little stunt proves he was right. This little stunt just secured a multi-million-dollar community development deal that will actually help people instead of exploiting them. Elena paused, finger hovering over her phone. What did you say? The Highland Park project. It's going to revitalize a community, create jobs, and generate sustainable profits. Everything my father believed in. How much profit? I quoted the projected numbers, watching Elena's expression shift from anger to calculation. Interesting, she said slowly. And the investors are committed? Fully committed, pending final approval. Elena lowered her phone. Cynthia, you've put me in a very difficult position. How so? Margaret has been less than successful in managing Blackwood Development's profitability. The board has been asking uncomfortable questions about performance and strategic direction. Understanding dawned. You need this deal. The family needs this deal. Without a major success soon, there will be investigations into the company's management, investigations that might uncover financial arrangements that are better left private. The offshore accounts Margaret had mentioned. Elena was protecting more than just my stepfamily's lifestyle. She was protecting herself from fraud charges. So what happens now? I asked. Elena studied me for a long moment. That depends. Are you prepared to be reasonable? What does reasonable mean?
You continue as Catherine Chen until the Highland Park project is complete. Generate the profits and positive publicity the company needs. In exchange, your little masquerade remains our secret. And after the project is finished? We'll discuss that when the time comes. Elena's smile was sharp as a blade. But Cynthia, if you try to expose anything about the estate arrangements or business operations, I'll make sure you face fraud charges for identity theft and corporate espionage. Your little lawyer friend won't be able to help you from prison. She knew about Alexander. Of course she did. Do we have an understanding? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Excellent. I'll inform the investors that Miss Chen has been thoroughly vetted and approved. Elena headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Cynthia, Margaret expects you home by 6 to help prepare for tonight's dinner party. Don't be late. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving me alone in the conference room where I'd just secured the biggest victory and suffered the worst defeat of my life. I'd saved the Highland Park project and proven my father's business philosophy could work, but Elena had me trapped more completely than ever before. My phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. How did the meeting go? I stared at the message, trying to figure out how to explain that everything had just changed, and that our carefully planned legal strategy might have just become impossible. The truth was out, but instead of setting me free, it had become the chain that bound me tighter than ever. That evening, I served dinner to Margaret's guests with hands that barely trembled, a skill perfected through years of hiding my emotions. But everything was different now. I knew about the forged signatures, the offshore accounts, and the precarious financial situation that made my Highland Park success essential to their survival. More importantly, I had a plan. While clearing the dessert plates, I overheard Margaret speaking to her accountant, Harold Brennan, in hushed tones near the fireplace. The quarterly reports can't show the full extent of the development losses, Margaret was saying. If the estate lawyers see how badly the company's been performing— Margaret, I've told you, Harold interrupted nervously. I can only massage the numbers so much before it becomes outright fraud. It's not fraud if it's temporary. Once this Highland Park deal closes, we'll have enough profit to cover the shortfalls. I nearly dropped the crystal water glasses I was carrying. They weren't just hiding money, they were cooking the books to conceal how badly they'd mismanaged my father's company. After the guests left, I retreated to my room and immediately called Alexander. Cynthia, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for hours. We have a problem. What kind of problem? I found something in your father's original business partnership agreements. There's a clause that automatically triggers ownership review if the company's performance drops below certain thresholds for 2 consecutive years. My heart started racing. What does that mean? It means if Blackwood Development has been as poorly managed as we suspect, there's a legal mechanism to force new ownership evaluation, regardless of the estate arrangements. Alexander, I overheard something tonight. I told him about the conversation between Margaret and Harold, about the accounting manipulation, and their desperation for the Highland Park profits. This is perfect, Alexander said excitedly. If we can prove they've been falsifying financial records to hide poor performance, it automatically voids their management authority under your father's partnership agreements. But Elena threatened to have me arrested for fraud if I exposed anything. She can threaten all she wants, but if they're committing actual fraud, her threats become meaningless. The real question is, can you get access to the financial records that prove the manipulation? I thought about Harold Brennan's nervous demeanor, about the accountant who clearly knew they were crossing legal lines. Maybe, but it's risky. Cynthia, this is our shot. If we can expose the financial fraud and prove the company's poor performance, you'll get everything back, not in months or years, but within weeks. After hanging up, I sat in my small room, staring at the wall that separated me from my father's study. Somewhere in that room were the documents that could prove everything, but getting to them meant taking enormous risks. The next morning, I woke up to chaos. Derek was shouting from upstairs. Vivian was crying dramatically in the living room, and Margaret was pacing frantically while talking on her phone. What's going on? I asked the housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, who looked as confused as I felt. Some kind of business emergency, she whispered. They've been like this since dawn. I found Margaret in my father's study, surrounded by open filing cabinets and scattered papers. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, and her makeup was smudged. Margaret, is everything all right?
She spun around, her eyes wild. No, everything is not all right. That idiotic accountant got scared and wanted to withdraw from handling our books. Says the risk is too high. Harold Brennan's abandoning ship, which meant they were about to be exposed anyway. Can I help with anything? I offered it innocently. Unless you know how to make financial records appear legitimate, no. Margaret suddenly focused on me with laser intensity. Actually, wait, you're good with paperwork and details. I need you to organize these files while I figure out what to do. She was asking me to organize the evidence of their own fraud. The irony was almost too perfect. Of course, I said. What specifically needs organizing? Everything in those boxes needs to be sorted by year and project. And Cynthia? Margaret grabbed my arm with surprising strength. If anyone asks, you never saw any of this. Understand? I nodded solemnly while mentally calculating how to photograph the most damaging documents. For the next 4 hours, I methodically sorted through papers that detailed years of financial manipulation. Project costs inflated to hide management fees, profits redirected to shell companies, development failures covered up by moving money between accounts. It was a masterclass in corporate fraud, all documented in meticulous detail. The most damaging discovery was a folder labeled Estate Distribution Adjustments. Inside were copies of the documents Elena had mentioned, including the original papers they'd tricked me into signing at my father's funeral. But also included were drafts showing the forged signatures, practice attempts at copying my handwriting, and notes about timing the deception.
My hands shook as I photographed page after page with my phone. This wasn't just fraud, it was a conspiracy that had been planned before my father was even buried. Around noon, Margaret left to meet with a new accountant, leaving me alone with the evidence. I immediately called Alexander. I have everything, I told him. Financial fraud, forged documents, the whole conspiracy. Send me the photos immediately. I'm filing an emergency petition this afternoon. Alexander, wait. If we do this now, they'll know I was the source. Elena will. Elena's threats won't matter once this hits the courts. Cynthia, they're about to destroy evidence and flee with whatever money they can grab. If we don't act now, there might not be anything left to recover from. He was right. I could see the panic in Margaret's behavior, the way Derek and Vivian were suddenly talking about taking extended trips to Europe. They were preparing to run. Do it, I decided. File everything. There's one more thing, Alexander said. When this goes public, your double identity as Catherine Chen will be exposed too. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Rodriguez, about the Highland Park project, about all the employees at Blackwood Development who were finally working on something meaningful. Yes, it's time for the truth. The next few hours passed in a blur. Alexander filed the emergency petition, complete with evidence of fraud, forgery, and estate mismanagement. By evening, federal investigators were serving warrants on both the family home and the Blackwood Development offices. I was in the kitchen when the FBI agents arrived. Margaret answered the door, and I heard her voice shift from confusion to outrage to panic in the span of 30 seconds. "This is ridiculous! We've done nothing wrong!" "Ma'am, we have a warrant to search the premises for documents related to estate fraud and corporate financial manipulation." Derek and Vivian came running downstairs, Derek still wearing his tennis clothes and Vivian clutching her designer purse like a lifeline. "What's happening?" Vivian demanded. "Your family is under investigation for multiple federal crimes," one of the agents replied matter-of-factly. I stayed in the kitchen, watching through the doorway as agents methodically gathered the same documents I'd been photographing hours earlier. Margaret kept insisting there had been some mistake, that they were innocent of any wrongdoing. "Where's Cynthia?" she suddenly called out. "This is all some misunderstanding. Cynthia can explain. She helps with all the paperwork." An FBI agent appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Ms. Blackwood, we'd like to speak with you." I followed him to the living room, where Margaret, Derek, and Vivian sat on the couch looking shell-shocked. A senior agent, a woman in her 40s with kind but serious eyes, addressed me directly. "Ms. Blackwood, we understand you've been providing information to the legal team investigating this case." "What?" Margaret's head snapped up.
We also understand that you've been working undercover at Blackwood Development under an assumed identity to gather evidence of corporate mismanagement. Derek and Vivian stared at me in complete bewilderment, but Margaret's expression shifted from confusion to pure rage. You, she hissed, you did this. I exposed the truth, I replied calmly, about the forged signatures, the stolen inheritance, and the fraud you've been committing for 3 years. You ungrateful little. Ma'am, the FBI agent interrupted, I need to inform you that you're being arrested for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and theft. As they read Margaret her rights, Derek turned to me with an expression of desperate panic. Cynthia, you have to tell them this is all a mistake. We're family. We took care of you. You made me a servant in my own home, I replied. You stole my inheritance and destroyed my father's company. That's not family. That's exploitation. Vivian started crying, real tears this time, not her usual dramatic performance. But where will we go? What will we do? You'll figure it out, I said, the same way you expected me to. As the FBI led them away, I stood in the living room of my father's house, my house, and felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. Freedom. My phone rang. Alexander. It's over, I told him before he could speak. Actually, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, it's just beginning. The court approved an emergency transfer of all assets back to you. Congratulations, Cynthia. You just got your life back. Looking around the mansion that had been my prison, I realized he was right. This wasn't an ending. This was my new beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the executive boardroom of Blackwood Development, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as construction crews broke ground on the Highland Park project. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same conference room where Elena had threatened to destroy me was now where I made decisions that would shape my father's legacy for decades to come. The community center will be finished by next spring, Janet Patterson said, reviewing the construction timeline. As the newly appointed community liaison director, she'd become invaluable in ensuring our projects actually serve the neighborhoods we developed in. And the affordable housing units? I asked. 70% pre-leased to local families. The waiting list is already full for Phase 2. Rodriguez knocked on the open door. Miss Blackwood, the staff meeting is ready to begin. I still wasn't used to the difference in his voice. 6 months ago, he'd been my supervisor. Now, as the reinstated owner and CEO of Blackwood Development, I was his boss. But unlike my stepfamily, I'd earned respect through competence rather than demanding it through fear. Thank you, Miguel. I'll be right there. The transformation of Blackwood Development had been swift once I'd taken control. The first week alone, I'd fired 3 managers who'd been skimming profits and hired back 4 senior employees who'd quit under Margaret's mismanagement. The Highland Park success had attracted new investors eager to fund ethical development projects, and our client list had doubled. But the most satisfying change was happening in the mansion's kitchen right now. I walked into my father's house, truly mine now, to find Margaret scrubbing the stove with the same intensity she'd once reserved for criticizing my cleaning. Her orange prison uniform had been replaced by a simple gray uniform. Her perfectly manicured nails were now short and practical, and her expression held none of its former arrogance. "Good afternoon, Margaret," I said pleasantly. She looked up, her face carefully neutral. "Good afternoon, Ms. Blackwood." The title still felt surreal, but I was getting used to it. After Margaret, Derek, and Vivian had been convicted of fraud and conspiracy charges, their court-ordered restitution included both financial penalties and community service. When their lawyer had suggested they work off part of their debt through domestic service, I'd been surprised to find myself agreeing. "How's the kitchen coming along?" "The oven is clean, and I finished organizing the pantry according to your specifications." "Excellent. And Derek?" Margaret's jaw tightened slightly. "He's in the garden, trimming the hedges." Through the window, I could see my former stepbrother wrestling with a hedge trimmer, sweat staining his shirt despite the mild weather. The man who'd once spent his days at the country club was learning what physical labor actually felt like. "And Vivian?" "Upstairs, cleaning the guest bathrooms." I nodded. The arrangement wasn't meant to be vindictive, though I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some satisfaction in the role reversal. Mostly it was practical.
Their restitution payments would take years to complete, and this way they could work off their debt while learning skills they'd somehow never acquired. Margaret, can I ask you something? She looked wary. Of course. Why did you do it? My father loved you. He would have taken care of you financially without you having to steal from me. For a moment, her carefully maintained composure cracked. Your father loved you more. Everything was always about Cynthia's future, Cynthia's education, Cynthia's inheritance. My children and I were afterthoughts. So you decided to make me the afterthought instead. I thought if we could just manage the money properly, everyone would benefit. But then the investment started failing, and Derek's expenses kept growing, and we had to hide the losses. She trailed off, looking older than her years. Until hiding became stealing, and stealing became a way of life. Margaret nodded reluctantly. I never meant for it to go so far. But once we started, stopping would have meant admitting what we'd done. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received from her, and surprisingly, it was enough. Well, I said, you have plenty of time to make amends now. My phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. Dinner reservations confirmed for 7 p.m., looking forward to celebrating your 6-month anniversary as CEO. I smiled, remembering how our professional relationship had evolved into something much more personal. His support during the legal battle had been invaluable, but it was his belief in my capabilities that had truly changed everything. Margaret, I'll be out this evening. Please make sure the house is secured before you and the others leave. Yes, Miss Blackwood. As I headed upstairs to change, I encountered Vivian in the hallway. She was carrying cleaning supplies and looked exhausted, her former designer wardrobe replaced by practical work clothes. Cynthia, she said hesitantly, Could I talk to you for a minute? I was surprised. In 6 months of working in the house, Vivian had barely spoken to me beyond necessary exchanges. Of course. She set down her supplies and took a deep breath. I wanted to apologize for how we treated you, for everything. What brought this on? Vivian gestured around the mansion. Living here again, but as this, it made me realize how horrible it must have been for you. Being treated like you didn't matter, having no control over your own life. It was educational, I said carefully. I keep thinking about how you never complained, never fought back. You just endured it all while planning your escape. Not escape, I corrected. Justice. Right. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. None of us do. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. What we did was wrong. The conversation was surreal. My former stepsister, who'd treated me like invisible help, was now genuinely remorseful while literally being my employee. Vivian, I appreciate the apology. And for what it's worth, this arrangement isn't permanent. Once your restitution is complete, you'll be free to rebuild your lives however you choose. But what if we can't? What if we don't know how to live without taking advantage of other people? It was a fair question. None of them had ever learned to support themselves honestly. Then you'll learn, the same way I learned to survive on my own, except you'll have help if you want it. Help? Derek has actually shown some aptitude for landscaping. There are community college programs that could help him start a legitimate business. You're good with organization and details. Administrative work might suit you. And Margaret, I paused, considering. Margaret has leadership skills, even if she uses them poorly. There are ways to redirect those abilities positively. Vivian stared at me in amazement. You'd help us? After everything? I'd give you the opportunity to help yourselves. What you do with it is up to you. That evening, I met Alexander at an upscale restaurant in Beverly Hills, the kind of place I'd once served at while my stepfamily dined as guests. You look happy, he said as I sat down across from him. I am happy. For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And how does it feel, being the boss instead of the maid? I considered the question while the waiter poured wine. Honestly, being the maid taught me more about leadership than any business school could have. How so? When you're powerless, you learn to observe everything. You understand what motivates people, what they really value, how organizations actually function beneath the surface. You also learn the dignity that comes from honest work. Alexander raised his glass.
to honest work, and to the most impressive businesswoman I know. To justice, I countered, and to the lawyer who made it possible. As we clinked glasses, I caught sight of my reflection in the restaurant's mirrors. The woman looking back was confident, successful, and genuinely content. She bore little resemblance to the scared, invisible girl who'd once served breakfast in her own kitchen. 3 months later, I stood in the same kitchen, but everything had changed once again. Margaret, Derek, and Vivian had completed their court-ordered service and were preparing to move out. Their restitution payments would continue for years, but they'd earned the right to rebuild their lives independently. "I've enrolled in the business management program at the community college," Vivian announced as she packed her belongings, "and I found a part-time job with an event planning company." "That's wonderful," I said, and meant it. Derek appeared in the doorway, his hands dirty from garden work, but his expression more mature than I'd ever seen it. "The landscaping course starts next month. I never thought I'd say this, but I actually enjoy working outdoors." "Your father would be proud," I told him. "He always believed in honest work." Margaret was the last to leave. She stood in the foyer with a single suitcase, looking around the mansion one final time. "I'll never be able to fully repay what we took from you," she said quietly. "The money doesn't matter as much as you think," I replied. "What matters is what we do with our second chances." After they left, I walked through the house alone, stopping in my father's study. I'd kept it exactly as he'd left it, and sometimes I could almost feel his presence there. "I think you'd be proud, Dad," I said aloud. "The company is stronger than ever, the Highland Park project is changing lives, and I finally learned what you were trying to teach me about building something that lasts." That evening, Alexander found me on the terrace overlooking the gardens Derek had restored to their former beauty. "So," he said, settling into the chair beside me, "what's next for the CEO of Blackwood Development?" I smiled, thinking about the proposal on my desk to expand our community-focused development model to other cities, about the employees who were finally proud of their work again, about the families who would soon have affordable homes in thriving neighborhoods. "Everything," I said. "We're going to build the kind of future my father always envisioned, one community at a time." Alexander reached for my hand. "And personally?" I looked at this man who'd believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, who'd fought for justice when I was too tired to fight, who'd seen my potential when I was invisible to everyone else. "Personally," I said, "I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The mansion that had once been my prison was now my home. The company that had nearly been destroyed was now a force for good. And the girl who'd been treated like a servant had become the woman who chose to serve her community instead of exploiting it. My stepfamily had used me as a maid, thinking it would break me. Instead, that had taught me everything I needed to know about true leadership, that real power comes from lifting others up, not holding them down, and that the best revenge isn't getting even, it's proving that you're better than they ever imagined you could be. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.